In a museum collection in New York, there is a crocodile skull gathered from southwestern Madagascar nearly a century ago. Its bone is pale and dry, the surface cracked like old river clay. Above the eyes, two blunt projections rise from the head, giving it an almost ceremonial look, as if the animal had been carved first in myth and only afterward in flesh. For decades it sat there with a label, a place in a cabinet, and a question that never really went away. Because the skull did not just belong to an extinct crocodile. It belonged to a contradiction. When early naturalists and explorers wrote about crocodiles in Madagascar, they recorded something curious. Local people seemed to distinguish between two kinds. One was more familiar, the long, gracile crocodile known today as a Nile crocodile population on the island. The other was larger, heavier, more robust. A different presence. A different body. And yet by modern times, only one remained. So what, exactly, had vanished? For a very long time, the answer seemed close at hand. The accepted story was that crocodiles, for all their ancient prestige, were evolutionarily conservative creatures. Powerful, yes. Successful, certainly. But straightforward. Their bodies changed slowly. Their lineages, once mapped by anatomy, looked stable enough. Scientists argued over details, but the broad picture appeared settled. Fossils could be sorted by the shape of the snout, the teeth, the skull table, the jaw hinges. Bone, after all, was supposed to tell the truth. And bone did speak. It just did not always speak clearly. That horned skull from Madagascar was first described in the 19th century and initially placed among the true crocodiles, the genus Crocodiles, the group that includes the Nile crocodile, the saltwater crocodile, and the American crocodile. Later, some researchers wondered if it was not a separate crocodile at all, but merely an unusually old or heavily built Nile crocodile. Then the picture shifted again. In the early 21st century, a detailed anatomical study argued that this animal did not really belong among true crocodiles. Its features seemed to pull it toward a different branch, closer to dwarf crocodiles in Africa. It was a remarkable reversal. The extinct animal from Madagascar was given a different genus, Voe robustus. The case seemed stronger than ever. The skull had been read, compared, measured, and interpreted. The mystery, many assumed, was narrowing. But there was a problem buried inside the confidence. Crocodiles are masters of repetition. Across millions of years, their bodies have returned again and again to similar solutions: broad snouts, narrow snouts, heavy skulls, ambushed jaws, armored backs. Natural selection can make unrelated branches resemble one another when they live in similar ways. A deep skull may say something about diet. A short snout may say something about feeding force. Horn-like projections may look dramatic, but drama is not ancestry. Anatomy can preserve history, but it can also counterfeit it. And so the horned crocodile of Madagascar remained poised between interpretations. Was it a strange side branch close to dwarf crocodiles, or was it something far more important, a relic near the base of modern true crocodiles themselves? The answer would not come from the shape of the skull alone. It would come from what the skull still held inside it. That is what makes this story so strange. Crocodiles are ancient. DNA is fragile. Heat, moisture, time, and microbes erase genetic material with extraordinary efficiency. Recovering usable ancient DNA from tropical or subtropical settings is notoriously difficult. Madagascar is not the sort of place that promises easy preservation. And this particular animal had been extinct for centuries, perhaps longer. In human terms, close enough to history. In molecular terms, perilously distant. Researchers tried more than once to retrieve genetic material from the subfossil remains. For years, the attempts failed. The technology was not yet ready. The fragments were too damaged, too scarce, too contaminated by time. But scientific dead ends have a way of aging badly. What cannot be done in one decade sometimes becomes routine in the next. Using newer paleogenomic methods, scientists were finally able to recover portions of mitochondrial DNA from two well-preserved skulls of the extinct horned crocodile. That changed everything. Because when the genetic data were compared against living crocodilians, Voe did not land with dwarf crocodiles after all. It emerged as the sister lineage to Crocodiles, the closest known extinct relative just outside the branch of true crocodiles alive today. Not inside the Nile crocodile. Not beside dwarf crocodiles. Not an anatomical curiosity on a minor island branch. Something more consequential than that. The old skull in the drawer had been carrying a missing part of the crocodile family story all along. This is the point where the title stops sounding exaggerated and starts sounding precise. The truth was not that scientists knew nothing before. It was that an important part of the crocodile origin story had been misread because morphology alone had been forced to do all the work. Ancient DNA did not erase earlier science. It exposed its limit. And once Voe moved on the family tree, a much larger implication followed. If the closest known relative of true crocodiles was an extinct lineage rooted in Africa's orbit and preserved on Madagascar, then the geographic origin of Crocodiles itself likely pointed back to Africa. From there, members of that lineage later spread outward, to Asia, to the Caribbean, to the Americas, becoming the global crocodiles we know today. That matters because crocodiles often seem like creatures without a journey. They appear as if they simply belong wherever warm rivers, mangroves, and estuaries happen to be. But this new picture restores movement to the story. It suggests dispersal, divergence, isolation, survival. It suggests that the crocodiles now found across tropical regions are part of a history with a stronger African center than many had assumed. And it makes Madagascar feel less like a side note than a vault. This island, already famous for preserving lost giant birds, vanished lemurs, and dwarf hippos, may also have sheltered a relict crocodile lineage long after related branches elsewhere had disappeared. Voe was not merely a local oddity. It may have been the surviving shadow of an older world, lingering on an island while the rest of the family tree transformed around it. Which brings us back to the unanswered detail from the beginning. Why did people on Madagascar seem to remember two crocodiles? Because for at least some part of the island's recent past, there probably really were two. The gracile Nile crocodile and the more robust horned crocodile may have overlapped in time, perhaps even in landscape. The testimonies of early observers, once easy to dismiss as confusion or folklore, now feel heavier. Not perfect evidence, but no longer trivial. They may preserve the echo of a coexistent science arrived late enough to doubt. And then, just as suddenly in historical terms, one of those crocodiles was gone. Why Voe disappeared remains less certain than where it belongs on the tree. That uncertainty matters. It forces restraint. Some researchers have proposed competition with Nile crocodiles. The two animals may have occupied similar ecological roles. If one species reproduced more effectively, dispersed more easily, or adapted better to changing conditions, the balance could have shifted. Others point toward a more familiar Holocene pattern on Madagascar: human arrival, environmental transformation, the collapse of vulnerable megafauna. There is little convincing evidence that adults of Voe were hunted intensively at scale, but even limited pressure on eggs, nesting habitat, or wetland systems can be devastating to large reptiles over time. Perhaps the extinction was not the result of one dramatic cause, but a convergence of smaller pressures. A rival lineage already present. Human disturbance spreading gradually across landscapes. Ecological systems becoming less forgiving. Extinction rarely announces itself with a single clean line. More often it accumulates in silences. There is another quiet irony in all this. Crocodiles are often treated as symbols of evolutionary stillness, animals that survived by refusing to change. But the real lesson here is almost the opposite. Their history is more dynamic than their appearance suggests. Their family tree has hidden branches. Their identities have been blurred by convergent anatomy. Their biogeography is tied to dispersal, isolation, and extinction. Even within the Nile crocodile complex, genetic work has shown that what seemed like one familiar species could conceal older, cryptic divisions. So the crocodile's stillness was, in part, our illusion. What ancient DNA revealed was not just the position of one extinct animal. It revealed how fragile our certainty can be when we mistake durable forms for simple histories. A skull can survive for centuries and still mislead. A lineage can vanish almost within reach of written memory and still alter the map of an entire group once its molecules are finally read. And there is something haunting about that. To stand before a crocodile is to feel the weight of deep time concentrated into a living body. But that feeling can be deceptive. Deep time does not mean clarity. It does not mean permanence. Even these animals, which seem to have arrived from some unbroken primordial past, carry lost relatives, erased experiments, and whole chapters written only in fragments. In the end, the horned crocodile of Madagascar changes more than its own obituary. It changes the angle from which we look at all modern crocodiles. They are no longer just survivors of an ancient design. They are the remaining members of a story that was once broader, stranger, and more geographically intricate than we thought. And somewhere behind that realization is still the image of the skull in storage, the bone ridges above the eyes, the dry geometry of the jaws, the old specimen number, the long wait. For years it looked like a remnant of a dead animal. Now it looks more like a witness. If this is the kind of history you like exploring, the kind that begins in a cabinet and ends by rearranging an entire world, you're welcome to stay with the channel. Because sometimes the past does not return as a grand discovery in the field. Sometimes it waits quietly in a drawer, until science learns how to listen.